was my job to check out of the Airbnb, and I left the Mettle on the dining room table. I walked out of the Airbnb, closed the door, locked it, and dropped the key in a mailbox that then I couldn't get the key back out of. Call. I had to like email my mom and get the phone number of the Airbnb owner. And we were supposed to be on the Today Show that morning. And I got super delayed, obviously. And I showed up. I remember it was in a square and it was set. And I showed up and like I was probably 5 minutes before they were actually going on air. And I showed up and there was this huge bodyguard. And I was like, I'm like jumping around, looking over his shoulders. I could just see the guys off in the distance. I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to be in there. And the guy's like, yeah, right. And I actually had to like dig the Mettle out and show. I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be with those 8 guys over there.
Everybody, welcome back to Fast Friends, presented by the Mettle Factory. Today is somebody who is a dear friend of mine. That is somebody who I personally got to spend a lot of time in the foxhole with and rowing. And I wouldn't say we were fast friends at first. So he's not one of my fastest friends when we met, but based off of the introduction that Justin's going to give him, you're going to see that this guest took it well beyond the meager beginnings of his rowing career to become one of the most historic and decorated oarsmen America's ever seen. He's a great coach, but he's really one of the best people out there, and nobody gives himself or herself to the sport more than this guy. Without further ado, Wyatt Allen, welcome to Fast Friends.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things we love to do is Justin is being the sports marketing genius that he is. He does a great rundown of just explaining to the audience why you're so awesome.
Well, before we do that, which I'm really excited to hear, were we not fast right off the bat, or were we not friends right off the bat?
That's for you to decide. That's for you to decide. It's your show, so we weren't fast. We weren't fast right off the bat. Why? I still don't know if we're friends, truthfully. So
he always can blame it on poor cell reception in Hanover when he doesn't pick up the phone.
Wyatt's usually a response to me is, "Don't you know how busy I am, Hans Blix?" So, without further ado, Wyatt Allen.
Episode. Yeah, the faster we start, the faster we get to the point where I come in.
All right, so just to explain to the audience who Wyatt is and who we have on today. Again, thank you for being on, Wyatt. Really excited to have you on. I know that you've been on our short list for a really long time of guests, so appreciate you making the time. So Wyatt is originally from Portland, Maine. Went to University of Virginia, where he graduated in 2001. Found rowing there as a walk-on rower. And then went on to have a pretty illustrious career as an oarsman, a 2-time Olympian, 9-time national team member, set an Olympic world record, and won a gold medal in 2004 in the men's 8, and then came back 4 years later in 2008 and won a bronze with Steve and Dan as well. Also won a super prestigious race, winning the Diamond Challenge Single Sculls at Henley in 2005, as well as was the U.S. Rowing Male Athlete of the Year, not once but twice, in 2004 and 2007. And then Wyatt took a coaching route and really has had an amazing run as a coach. Has been at Dartmouth for quite a while now, taking over that program in 2014, really bringing it to a super high level, which we'll get into on the show, where it is today. Was named the IRCA National Coach of the Year in 2025, leading the Dartmouth crew to a 3rd place at the IRA National Championship, as well as a runner-up at the Eastern Sprints for the Varsity 8. Ivy League Coach of the Year, unbeaten dual season in 2025, and is starting to really transform the Dartmouth organization and team into a pretty strong powerhouse, which is becoming consistent nationally as a contender with really elite top-performing athletes. Really, really strong accolades there. I think the strongest accolade is we found a quote from your coxswain, one of your athlete coxswains, Sammy Hudagili. I pronounce that? Hudagi, thank you. Coach Wyatt is Dartmouth rowing, quote unquote. Coach Wyatt is Dartmouth rowing. He inspires and expects everyone to achieve their potential, not just on the water, but also in all facets of life. His strength of character is evident in every interaction you have with him. His leadership, integrity, and commitment to his athletes has made every member of the team a better person. Wyatt, welcome to the show. Phenomenal content here for us to dig into. And yeah, we're excited you're on Fast Friends. And I'll flip it back to Dan and we'll get into it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Justin. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. That's basically my story. I think better than I can lay it out there. So I appreciate the introduction.
But no worries. We had our
That's the
elves on the
outline to the
research
show.
team. We had our elves on the research team go dig it up. Shout out to them in the garage that don't exist. And we're really excited to share that with the world.
One quick correction, just so we're accurate. I wasn't Ivy League Coach of the Year, actually. That was Charlie Butt.
Correction. We will edit that.
Charlie is
Steve,
Or not.
We're not.
It's all right.
Cool.
We'll blame
Again,
the elves.
The elves.
The
Bad
elves.
research. Okay.
We're gonna start rumors.
Everything else is pretty solid. I think we can get away with it.
I
everything
think we
else.
get away with that.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
No worries.
So before I ask our opening question, I think it's really important for the context of the audience and even my co-host is Wyatt has the nickname of Eeyore. And he's already smiled more probably in the first 5 minutes than he has in the past 5 weeks because I have been the Tigger to this Eeyore for so long. So, of course, I'm really excited, but I would love to know, Wyatt, from your perspective, why do you think you're here on Fast Friends?
Why do I think I'm here?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm just here to continue the storytelling. I mean, I think I kind of fit into the group that you've had on. I mean, it's a pretty compelling group to be following up and considered to be a part of. But I think it's just, to continue telling the story of our journey through 2004 and 2008. I don't know. Is that accurate? Is that why I'm here?
You know thyself, Wyatt, know thyself. Yes, all of those things. I mean, it's with the bio that Justin just ripped, it's really hard to not see why you're here. And we like to ask that question because all of us have this really stoic response to that, I think. Some people dive into it with more storytelling. But I think yours is so unique, especially because you were a walk-on, right, to this sport. You don't have that junior experience. And especially with a little bit of the juxtaposition of where you are now with rowing as a coach. Like the idea of you growing up in Portland, Maine, way up there in New England, and making your way to Virginia, just would love to know a little bit about the athlete that you were in high school and how rowing kind of, as Carrie Simmons says, gets your claws into you. Like not only did it entice you onto that boathouse in Virginia, but it made you stick around for 9 national teams, right? So like, that's the part that I'm really interested in is just like that transition from curious kid to one of the world's best.
Yeah. So growing up in Portland, I played soccer and then lacrosse. I mean, I played soccer my entire childhood through middle school and high school. Picked up lacrosse kind of late in middle school. Played that through high school, and I loved both those sports, and I like to think I played at a high level. Maine's not a hotbed for either one of those sports, but I took it seriously and wanted to be good at both of those sports. But really, probably being honest, I was kind of a long shot to be like a Division III collegiate player in either of those sports, right? And so at the end of the day, I picked the University of Virginia for academic reasons and location, and headed down there with sort of this dream of trying to walk on in either one of those sports. And quickly, realized when I walked on campus that, that was probably a pipe dream. And, I had to kind of figure out what to do next with my life. And I really, spent the first couple weeks on campus, with the mindset that I was done being an athlete. I was just going to be sort of, as my guys here at Dartmouth call them NARPs, right? Non-athletic regular people. And I was sort of settling into that. And,
That's a universal. That's a universal term.
Yeah, I learned it when I got to Dartmouth.
Is that like a takeaway from video games, NPCs, non-playable characters?
Similar, But yeah, they've
Have
been
you heard
calling them
that?
NARPs for a while. Sometimes endearing, sometimes not.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope I didn't just say something
No,
unintentional.
no, because I have a lot of my athletes will come in and be like, "Oh, this is one of my NARP friends," and so sometimes it's a badge of honor, sometimes it's not.
Well, I thought I was heading down that path, and I remember, it was probably the third week I was on campus. A guy came up to me in the dining hall and just said, "Hey, you're tall, you look athletic, you should think about giving rowing a try." And I remember the pitch was, come down, give this a try. You're going to get in the best shape of your life and you're going to meet the best group of people on campus. Right. I remember that sort of stuck with me. And, it was a little bit of a convoluted route getting there. I had a work study job on campus that I started up, and I remember that conflicted with the first couple of tryouts, and so I actually didn't go. And I kind of, I guess I was just like, yeah, it's not going to work out. And I remember then, like a week or so later, it just popped back into my head, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to send an email off and see if they'll, give me a late tryout. And I did that. I went down and gave the erg a shot and met the group, and was hooked pretty early on. And I think it was for both those reasons that were pitched to me by the guy that came up and grabbed me in the lunch line. It was just an amazing group of people. I was at this big state university. I was pretty far from home. I was trying to figure out like how I was going to find my social circle, and I liked the group of people immediately. And the sport itself, I kind of described my background in soccer and lacrosse, and I played both of those sports hard. I trained my butt off, and in some ways, not to be sort of defeatist, but I was always a couple steps too slow to play those sports at a high level. And I found rowing, and I had kind of basic, I had the frame, I had physiology, and very quickly I figured out like, hey, if I want to be good on the erg, I just got to row the erg more, right? And I found this sport that had this really direct correlation between the work you put in and the results you see on the back end. And that was really appealing to me after kind of striking out at two sports I played for a really long time. So that's how it got its claws into me.
Do you think it's because it's so simple? Like just hearing you, like obviously I've noodled over it a lot, but just like, do you think because it's so simple, because there is that linear correlation that it's more approachable as a walk on, and you're just like you can visualize the path to being good, and you can understand like the time horizon, and it's not just this like, oh, like if I like can cradle the ball a certain way, if I have like that soft touch, like there's something more linear versus like, you either got it or you don't with some of those ball sports.
Steve, how do you cradle ball again?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in high school, I remember watching like the cross country team train. And, I was playing soccer and they were like running laps around this area we called the back cove. And I mean, I loved playing ball sports. I loved being on a team. And so that sport didn't necessarily appeal to me, but I remember watching them and thinking like, man, that's really straightforward. Like I could get into like, if I want to be a good runner, I'm just going to run a whole lot more and try to outwork people. And so I think that's kind of what I found in rowing, and it's that simplicity you're talking about.
Yeah. You've
Yeah.
always
I mean,
been stubborn like that and willing to like just nose down and grunt.
but it's also really intriguing to me because it's a similar narrative of coming into rowing too at the age of 18 versus say like 13, 14, or even younger, having this kind of, you've already gone through college decision, right? You've had your first major choice as a young adult to decide what school you want to do. And you glossed over, you did it for academic reasons. UVA is no slouch of a school. And like, one of the things I want to just get out there is like, you're incredibly intelligent, right? You're an incredibly intelligent person, and you're going to Eeyore it and be like, oh, that's smart, right? But like, you are. And I think that like empirical feedback that you get from the erg, like not only did that attract you, but I mean, we'll get into that, but you became like the owner of that machine, right? Pushing that machine to levels that people hadn't seen. And to knowing that and competing against you with that is you never seem to have the same anxiety to that machine that like I feel like a lot of us that rode in high school did. And, I think Bo articulated that and Brian. And I think that it's to hearing it come from you and just knowing that you saw that as an avenue versus an hindrance is just such a cool through line. And I just love a little bit to know a little bit more is like you mentioned the erg as one of the first things that attracted you. So two follow-ups is like, do you remember the person's name who grabbed you in the cafeteria? Two, was it love at first stroke on the erg, or was it something that you had to develop? Because that definitely is what set you apart at Virginia, because you started getting looked at the national team really quick once you started rowing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Ted Clark who grabbed me in the lunch line, and oddly enough, Ted has a son now, Tag, who is arriving at Dartmouth to start his freshman year. He's going to be on the lightweight team.
Cool. That's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
So it's kind of a cool full circle moment for me. Yeah, and I think the erg was a pathway to the national team, and I've told this story a bunch of times. Like one of the things I thought was great, and I give Mike Tatey and his staff credit for when we were coming up, was there was this. You remember the national team training protocol? It was like, you know, October, November, December, January, you had to submit a 6K, right? By the end of the month. And then like a week later, they all got voted, and you had this, long list, and you saw exactly where you stood and the people who tested that month. And then somewhere like February, March, it turned to 2Ks. And, I think that, again, talking about the simple linear path, right, that rowing provides. And then my background, having kind of failed at other sports, I'm like, okay, here's my second chance at a collegiate athletic career, right? And another thing that was appealing to me, right, was, in the pitch early on at Virginia was, okay, we're a club team, but we go to the national championship. We go to the IRA and we race against Cal and we race against Washington. I was like, okay, I almost, if I do this and we do it at a high level, I'm almost a varsity collegiate athlete, right? And I thought that was really cool. So I think a lot of what motivated me when I found the sport and recognized this linear path was it was this incredible, like unexpected second chance at an athletic career. And I think that was like, I was just going to take that and run with it as far as I could.
Man, that's awesome.
So we a couple things. I appreciate how you've articulated it for sure, Wyatt. I do think it's really interesting. You're not the first person, and Dan alluded to it. We've had folks on that were, 13, 14, picked up an oar, and it was this whole, ascension to collegiate national team, like, long journey, as you're well aware, obviously, as a coach. And then we've had a lot of people on that have also shared the same podium as you, the top step, that were just honestly just unbiased, uninhibited from any noise, and just didn't know what they didn't know. And just to your point, I think the best articulation you gave was like you had an instant measuring stick, which was obviously tangible, and you just knew that like this was a number, and you didn't know any better that number was hard or not hard to achieve, and you just did. And so I think that's really interesting similarities to some other folks. We've mentioned them, right? Like Brian, Bo, and some others. One of the questions I had that was like, you're getting to it pretty quickly, so I'll just ask it now. At what point, when you started doing those turn-ins, if you will, of those scores, the 6Ks, the 2Ks, were you like, oh, like, my name's kind of high towards the top of this list? Like, or maybe it's the top of the, I don't know, it might have been the top of the list. But were you like, oh, there's something more here than the UVA program? Or were you just like, cool, like I'm probably the fastest guy at UVA, like we'll see where this goes? Or were you like, no, now it's starting to get like planting seeds?
Well, I'll start with the end of my freshman year. We did 2Ks my freshman year, and ergs were different back then. I mean, the ergs that exist in the collegiate space, in the national team space, are just, or the volume of guys that are now under 6 minutes is just so far above and beyond what it was when we were coming up. But
Totally.
I remember we did this like crash B simulation regatta at Virginia, and we were a separate novice team and the varsity team, and we had heats and finals. And I remember I went 6'11". No, I went 6'17" in the heat. And then the varsity program, we did them separate. And the varsity program had like probably 5 or 6 guys that broke 620 at the time. And that was pretty good for a club program. And those were really
100%.
good guys. And I remember they were looking at me like, holy smokes, you just beat us by 2 seconds. You pulled the top time. And I was like, yeah, but you guys, it was the heat. Like you're like, I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was like, you guys were, you're saving it for the final, you know? And then in the final, I went 6'7", and won. And I was like, okay, that was a moment where, and that was like at the time, I think it was a program record, right? Again, like some of the club athletes these days are way above and beyond that. But that was kind of like a moment where I'm like, okay, maybe I can be pretty good at this. And then it wasn't until my sophomore fall, that I started submitting ergs to that testing protocol. I went to an ID camp in Princeton, New Jersey, at the boathouse, which I think was another incredible thing that the national team system did at that time. And I just remember walking to the Princeton boathouse and seeing, I remember Matt Madigan was the first guy I saw. I don't know if you guys remember Matt in his prime, but he was like, he looked like Soda Popinski from Mike Tyson's Punch Out. He was like, waist and this huge shoulders. And I was like, my goodness, like, boy, am I out of my element physically, right? But that was sort of the first time I got to be around national team athletes and start to sort of dream that, okay, maybe I.
It's a big shout out to Matt's son, Tony, right? What he did in the single this year as a junior. Like that was cool to see. So just talk about these full circle moments and, um, Madigan's such I want to get him on the show too. So like, but yes, you're right. Like Madigan, I know this is your show, but just for context, because like people who hear Wyatt, who know Wyatt now, are gonna be like, Wyatt's a monster. Like Madigan was winning triathlons in the Clydesdale division, beat like at 225 pounds plus, running times and Ironmans faster than like 180-pound dudes. Like he was just this monster engine. So like, yeah, Madigan is so like I can imagine seeing him as your first athlete and be like, I don't belong here.
Yeah.
So
And
sorry, thank you. Yeah.
The coolest, nicest guys you'll ever meet, right?
Yes. Yeah, he's the best. He's the best. All right, sorry, I took that over. But so you're having these really cool moments, are reaching these times that no one's ever seen at Virginia. You're beating these varsity guys. You're going to Princeton ID camp. You're putting yourself in the mix. You're starting to submit the scores. So far, a lot of this seems like it's really self-driven. You're making a lot of these choices all the way from high school to decide to go to Virginia, to try out for this team, to even decide like, oh, I missed some tryouts, I want to. What is driving you at this point to make these decisions? You think like, what's the motivation? Like, I know it's the second chance, and that's a huge thing, right? A second chance at anything in life is amazing, but you're also just kind of stumbling into greatness, right? That 6'11" score, and again, context is there, but we have to understand that that's the top 99% of collegiate scores at that time, right? And what are you feeling as you're going through this? Like, what's the drive that's getting fed at this moment?
Yeah, just being, I don't know, I think I'm a really competitive person. So it was this system of, again, that direct input and leading to, better outputs and feeling like, hey, I'm pretty good at this and it could lead somewhere, And so it was, I don't know, it was really, it just was really enjoyable for me. I remember in those years, just like trying to work my way up that list. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Right. And yeah, it was self-driven, but I was really lucky. I will say this, like I was extremely lucky that I was at Virginia. When I was at Virginia, it was a well-supported club men's program, it had good coaching. Ted, the guy I talked about who grabbed me out of line, and his classmates were phenomenal rowers. right? Like they were the group my junior year. We went to the IRA and we got 11th as a club program. Like I was very fortunate to be where I was at the time we were there together. So that was helpful as well. And I think I came in and I sort of was raising the bar and those guys came along with me. So I didn't feel like I was on that journey all alone for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I think that just definitely ties into the type of teammates you are and team player, and which, the next team that you start knocking on that door is the national team. And as you said, you were moving up those lists. And I remember my first moment of knowing Wyatt Allen is sitting next to him on an erg in Roxbury, Massachusetts, at this thing called the Crash Bees, and getting screened by Dave Simon, and kind of like, forgetting I was racing you and too busy looking at this other dude going 541. But I remember knowing like, okay, this guy, right? This guy's here. He's coming to play, and it was fun because I think that year, was it '01? What year was your first national team, right? Your first U23 experience.
So my first U23 experience was 2000 with Luke in Ithaca, New York. Right. And
Wow. Wow.
so,
Yeah.
in the story I love to tell about that. Right. And this will, I hope Luke, you don't feel like I'm painting you in the bad light. Right. That camp, right. Virginia went to Henley. That was my junior year. Cal went to Henley and Brown was like the other big dog at Henley that year. So Virginia's racing in the Temple and you guys were both in the ladies plate, right? Luke, Cal
Yep.
and Brown. And I
Yep.
remember we got knocked out on like Wednesday, right? And I knew I had this invite to the under 23 camp. I was psyched, I'm like birding in that hot, sweaty tent every day. And I remember I moved my ticket to today so I could watch the racing and then get out of there. I flew into Dulles. I got in my car. I drove straight to Ithaca because I wanted to get there the first day I could, right? And I got to Ithaca like, I guess it was late. I think it was like late Sunday or Monday. And I got there and Dan Rook, who was the coach, had given the group like the long weekend off. So I like killed myself to get there. And then no one was even at the boathouse, right? Okay, mistake number one. But then I remember I got into camp and I think, Luke, correct me if any of this is wrong, but it was like, I think the Brown guys came in like 4 days later, and then you and Graham came in like 5 days later, right? And it was just like, the Virginia club guy versus who were, the class of the camp, right? Like, the pair from Cal, and then the three guys that came in from Brown, right? Luke,
Yeah,
and
I
Eric
I
Winners.
remember it even more than 5 days. I don't think it was until like 10 days after Henley that I actually showed up and came to the camp. So you're not wrong that you killed yourself to be there, and then like we came in pretty late. And I think we were also riding that like, well, we were here in '99, so yeah, we're back. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how that happened that summer.
Yeah, and rightly so. Like you guys you'd earned the opportunity and earned the seats. It was just that's like etched in my memory. I just remember like dive bombing back there and then getting to this empty boathouse and then sort of fighting my way from there. And I made the spare pair at that, it was Nations Cup at that point, and we sent an 8 and a spare pair. And I was in the pair with a guy named Brian Bauer from Wisconsin, had a great experience. I mean, Luke, I was thinking about this earlier today when I was kind of thinking about this podcast, and I learned so much from the few times I got to row behind you at that camp. I remember going back to Virginia and being like, things happen at a totally different speed than what we're doing here. And I had like your blade etched in my memory from that camp.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think this is great because like where we're going to go in this conversation, as we start to talk about national team stuff, inflection points and everybody's experience is different. And so I'm kind of fascinated, like I'm very fascinated to hear like your experience from 2001 onward, because mine was kind of like coming in 2001 and like, there had been 99 and 2000 under 23 and there was sort of established, and that really helped me along in 2001, but things changed for me like dramatically. And so we saw a lot of changes in people's trajectory through the time that they were on the national team and the spots that they ended up. So yeah, like I think I'm going to be very interested to, not push this along prematurely, but once we get to the national team part of it, it'll be really interesting to hear your experience. Like you said, oh, I started JV, and it's like, yeah, but look where you went, So I'm interested in that part of the journey as well.
Well, go ahead, Ray Ray.
No,
By the way, my dog is named after Wyatt.
that tells you something.
It's a beautiful dog. I've met the dog. It's a beautiful
Yeah,
dog.
yeah. I mean, his name was Ray, but Ray became because you. But Justin, you had something? I didn't want to.
No, I was going to say like we could go right there. I mean, so like wrap us up.
I think we are. We're there, right?
Yeah,
You're on the national team. You just you made it. And
kind
in
of
2 years, right? 2 years you made
Yeah.
it. You went from not rowing to now you're at the World Championships for the best rowers that are under the age of 23, right? So that collegiate age group.
Yeah,
And
that was
so, yeah.
after my junior year. So 3 years rowing under my belt.
So was it? I have a question, just real quick. Like you were kind of like we're going kind of linearly and going through it. Like, were you just like, yeah, let's go, or was there ever any like hesitancy that you had to overcome? Like, I mean, we lovingly call you Eeyore because you're always like, oh, I'm not that good, right? And then you come in and you just fucking kill it.
internally, it's like, I'm better than all you. I'm going to show you.
Yeah, but was there ever
I
any
can
like?
promise you that's not the inner dialogue.
Well, but was there ever any like I shouldn't go? Like I gotta get this job. What am I doing? Like what would? Or were you just like, yeah, let's just see what happens, and maybe I'll get chewed out the back end, but this will be a great experience. Like, were you just like embracing the journey, or was there a little bit of hesitancy that you had to overcome?
No, I think I was embracing the journey, right? And I think that's it's interesting based on the description of being Eeyore, but like for me, it was just exciting, right? And it really was like, let's just see. I think one of my big advantages, to your question, Luke, like I look back on my journey and I feel like one of my big advantages, and I mean this, right? I always just felt lucky to be there, right? I just wanted to get an invite to the Princeton Training Center. Like that was the next thing I was focused on when I got back to my senior year of college at Virginia. Like, let's have a good year. And if I can keep improving, maybe I can make another under 23 camp. And then I can get Mike to invite me to Princeton and I'll get to train full time. That'll be awesome. I remember I got to Princeton, right? That was September, 2001, right? Like it was a pretty weird time to be trying to move to like the New Jersey, New York area. I remember when I finally got there in October, like Mike, in typical Mike fashion, was like, well, look, I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 2 weeks. So we'll see how you do. And, we'll see how you do at this next, 6K and maybe we'll keep you around. And it was kind of like, I don't think he was doing it intentionally, but I was kind of like, all right, I'll try to make it to that 6K and do a little bit better. And then it was like can I make it on the training trip to Chula Vista in January? And then can I actually get assigned a good partner when we go to doubles, to the doubles NSR, that kind of thing. So I think having the background and the path that I had was an advantage once I got to the national team because I didn't have the pedigree that then applied some pressure, just being honest, when we were coming up, like the sculling program was secondary to the sweep program. And when I got to Princeton, Mike was like, hey, we're just going to put you in the sculling group. And I remember Corzo refused. I swear to God, he refused to learn my name for like a month and a half. And there were times when we'd be standing outside the bay and I would see him hit someone and be like, he had to be reminded all the time. But like that was, and I was fine with it because I wasn't coming out of a program where I was like, well, I should be in that sweep group. It was like, okay, this is where they say I should go. I'm just, okay, I'll figure it out. And that ended up being like one of the best things that happened to me because I then rode the single from, this was again, I rode the single from like October. And I remember, if you want me to tell stories, I'll tell stories. I remember the first time.
That's exactly why you're here.
That's why you're here.
We would definitely appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah.
You remember we used to do the stone bridge out back to the stone bridge pieces?
Yeah, with a stake turn.
Yeah.
With the stake turn, right?
Yeah.
I remember the first time I did that, I was like, okay, I'm going to like pace myself and be conservative on my energy and take a good line. And I remember I came through the stone bridge. I was clearly finishing last, but I came back through the stone bridge. And you remember Mike and Chris would sit in their launch right there and they would take times. I came sprinting through the stone bridge as fast as I could. And I looked up and I was so far behind the group that Mike and Corzo were sitting on the bench. They had parked their launch, stopped timing people, and were already like enjoying their morning coffee. And so like, if that's your starting point and you're not like, again, it was almost like I didn't know to be stressed. Yeah, of course I was bummed, but it wasn't like I was, stressed about it. I already felt like I had done something by getting invited to Princeton. So it was like a good starting point and then I could build from there. But that year of rowing the single saved my career because I think if I'd gone into the sweep group, I probably would have lost. I know I would have lost a bunch of switches. I would have gotten this reputation for slowing boats down and being clunky to row with. And instead, I got to go out and just be in the single and slow myself down until I got decent. Right. And that was I look back on that time, like it was just so much fun, just kind of chasing people out on that lake and trying to make myself relevant in the training group. And I remember there was a day right before the first NSR in March in the singles where I always remember seeing stern decks in the last 250 for the first time. Like I'm like, holy smokes, I'm actually like in the same zip code as the other single scullers. And then we went to the NSR. It happened so quickly. That was maybe 2 weeks before the NSR. And then at the NSR, I came second in the time trial, came second overall. It was like this like very slow plodding ascension in the single to where I was actually competitive. And then I was able to kind of shoot to the front of the group at that point, which was, that was as much fun as I had training and rowing in my career.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you had coaching by that point and that he knew your name. Yeah.
Well, I think
he wasn't on the bench drinking.
The erg helped him get coaching through the winter. That's for sure.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, there was two more moments, and feel free to edit any of this. Right, like I remember there was the crash bees, and I did really well there, but I hurt my back during the piece. I finished, and I forget what I did. I was somewhere around 550, which was really good in the group at that time. And then the next like Monday, I was on the bike, and I remember Chris came in, and he was like, so I guess it is time to give you coaching. And this was like literally February. The crash bees the next morning at early compared to the rest of the group. So maybe I was down there at like 6:30 and we were rowing. It was late February. And I remember I showed up, he wasn't there yet. I took out my single, I put it in the water, and I was on that dock way at the far end of the boathouse in Princeton. And Chris came out onto the dock and he was like, and I do a bad Chris impression, and I love Chris to death. So none of this is meant to be anything other than,
I gotta interject because I just talked to him like 2 weeks ago, and he was like, I told him about the show, and he's like, just, you guys need to talk some shit. Like, he's like, are you telling the truth? Are you telling, like, I beat him and he beat me and he was no good? And like, I don't believe in what Mike Tatey did. Like, he's like, he was all energetic about,
True.
so like, I think if whatever happens, because hopefully he's watching, but whatever happens is like, yeah, make fun of Chris. I think he would enjoy it.
Well, so he came out onto the dock and I was sitting there in the single. And again, this was Chris Korzanowski and I was like nobody, and I just remember being really nervous. And he came up, he stood over it and he was like, well, your big project for Michael. He goes, I am more skeptical. He goes, something about the way you move disturbs me. That's a wood. And that was it. And I was sitting there in the single. And I'm like, okay, are we going out or is that the end of the lesson? Like, what's going on here? So, and again, like, I remember those times and, you tell the story and you're like, I should have been probably more deterred than I was at the time. But again, I just was like, I really was at that point happy to be there and just like psyched to get a little bit of Chris's attention. Right.
And my favorite part about being able to do this and have this medium is like the amount of memories that start come flooding back from like these shared experiences. One, it's better to be called wood than butter by Chris. You can feel free to tell that story if you want later.
For you like the butter.
So, but like your character, right? The Wyatt Allen's character is one of the most astounding forces of nature that I've been privileged to experience. And to hear it from your perspective, again, from that outside, right? Because one of the things that's really interesting is that we all have these assumptions of what the rower is, and it took a while to get to know what the person is. And, racing you, right? Like whatever the inner monologue is of anybody, racing you, especially like on the erg, because there was that overlap. And I think to really be fair to the hurdles that it took for you to become great, is that sculling in that era wasn't secondary, it was tertiary, right? Anything outside the men's 8 or the women's 8 in that era was the JV, right? So if you're in the straight forward, any Olympic events, right? But then the sculling team was a tertiary team in a way, right? It was almost like the development squad of the national team. It's like after you got cut and cut and cut. And so the fact that on the inside, you were just happy to be there did not reflect the faces you would give us when you were starting to learn to walk through us or beating everybody by a split. Like what you did is like you elevated the level and you actually elevated the pressure of the pedigree people to be like, yo, this dude just showed up and he's now beating everybody. He just took the most difficult boat class to be good in and he's now the best in the US with it. Like he's like, it from my perspective as your teammate and your competitor, and especially really heartbroken when you told me that you almost went to Northeastern your senior year. And Justin and I, like, we love everybody that was in that boat, but none of them are Wyatt Allen, So
Dan dropped that on me 15 minutes before this podcast started, and I was just like, that would have been a game changer.
Yeah.
But anyways,
that would have been nice.
I love everybody, but still.
Yeah.
Anyways,
yeah.
good.
But I'm obviously a fan. I'm a big fan of yours, right? I always have been, but it's that character. It's that your perception of yourself is nothing that we ever perceived of you. It was like, this freight train's coming and I either got to adapt to it or I'm going to get run over by it. And I think that just wanted, as we move forward in the story, is like, that's my experience of getting to know you, because I feel very privileged that as you went through sculling, you made the quads. I want to know what captivated you to change from 2 oars to 1. Because your successes, other than the single at Diamond Sculls and the NSRs, are in the 8, right? And so I think that's such an intriguing reason, right? I would love to hear from you about what made you decide to go from 2 oars to 1.
Yeah, I just think it was Mike coming to me in the fall of '03 and saying he wanted me to sweep. And again, it wasn't I'm not going to say it was an easy decision because at that point I had established myself as a pretty good bet to make the Olympic team in a sculling boat if we qualified it, but at the same time, it was Mike Cady asking me to take a run at the sweep teams. That decision in the fall of '03, right? And you were a big part of that, Dan, right? Like I don't know if this story's been told, but like, I was told, I was going to get a shot on sweep and he wanted me to switch back over and he was going to send Dan and I to Chula Vista so that Dan could teach me to row the pair. Right. And that's what happened. Like we slept for a little bit in October. And I remember Corza was out taking the lightweights out to Chula Vista and we went out with them and it was,
Wasn't good. It
pair
wasn't good.
racing against lightweights.
Wasn't good.
Yeah. And Dan, like talk about character. That was one of the most selfless acts by anyone around me throughout my journey, right? Like, yeah, you weren't giving up, hopefully you didn't feel like you were giving up anything, but like you were taking yourself out of the Princeton selection for the fall and you were really teaching me how to row a pair. And I I I will always appreciate the sacrifice you made to help me along that fall, right? You know, we had some pretty funny moments out there and um I think that
You
the
got to you got
interesting
to
thing
tell the Chris Nielsen story from your perspective, please. Please. Like it's just
well,
that one
yeah,
our best practice. Our best
it's going to change the narrative of me just always being happy to be there because I think we were getting pretty stressed out because we were getting our butts kicked by the lightweights in pairs, right? That
Yeah, but that's
the
what's important.
majority of the time we were out
It's the
there.
change, right? The change of having to be there to I fucking want this.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't like it was frustrating for me, Dan, but I can only imagine how frustrating it was for you because you were established in the sweep group. You were a good hair rower, and here you were kind of taking this step back and getting your butt handed to you while we were just the only two heavyweights out in Chula Vista. But the story you want me to tell was Chris Nielsen, who were doing 3Ks, and I think this was probably getting towards mid to late November, right? And I forget Chris was taking times off to the side. I don't know. Chris had a knack for being able to like push buttons and get under people's. And what did he yell at us? He said, I think he just told us to pull harder, which was never our issue, right?
It was never our issue. It was not. You and I never have a pull heart issue. No.
Yeah, and I remember you screamed something back at him. I'll let you describe what you yelled back while we're building into a piece.
I think he just said try harder, and I was like, we are fucking trying.
And he said, "Yeah, and don't bugger me either."
No, you're being kind. You're being kind. It was because that was the turning point. I think it was, yes, it was towards the end of the camp. We're getting our asses kicked. And I was frustrated because my ego has always been a problem. And it's because rowing saved my life, right? Like, but my thing with rowing, and I don't want to make this about me as your show is, it saved my life and I cherished every moment of it. And I just felt like I had to do it all in order to prove it was possible, right? So the pressure that I never showed was that. And you were the fastest erg, man, right? Mike wanted you to come. And it's like, if I could help anybody be better and it was you, that would just hopefully put me in a better position with Mike because, Mike didn't like me. So Chris is on us and I'm not helping you get better. I feel like I'm failing you, right? My whole job was to make you, we're getting beat by lightweights. And Chris, and it wasn't about effort, right? Like we were training twice a day, we're 3 times a day, we're doing circles, we're eating, we're talking about it. We're the only 2 heavyweights. The rest of the guys are coming in January. So the pressure was surmounting. And like when he questioned our effort, to your point, like it was never about pulling, it's just like, fuck you, we are trying. And he goes, don't you yell at me. And I'm like, fuck you. And he goes, and don't fuck me either. And that's when you lost it. You were like, if you were drinking chocolate milk at the lunch table, you would have snarfed it all over me. and you just start giggling. And then we laughed it off. And then shortly after that, we flipped at the start of a piece. And then Chris just stopped coaching us and we got better.
There was that. But then, so then then what happened was my back went out in December, right? As bad as it's ever gone out. I ended up trying to push through it, but then had to go home. I took the majority of December off. That was the single toughest period in my career because I was doing everything and my back wouldn't get any better. And then I remember get more story time, guys. I thought I was going to get on here and like not have anything to tell you guys, right? Yeah, I remember I came back out
Fast Friends effect, baby. Fast Friends effect.
I came back out to Chula Vista in like mid-January and the whole group was out there, right? And I remember I was still like, it got a little bit better, but I'm like, I just don't think I'm going to be able to survive. And I arrived in Chula Vista midday and I walked down the hill and Mike was coming in the single, which is a whole nother story. The single he was rowing, the surprise. Remember the surprise you're sculling, that single?
Yeah.
And
yes.
it was so he comes in and I walk down the hill and he's like, hey, I talked to the Doc Jerko. And I'm like, yeah, what did he say? He said, yeah, he goes, you're fucking fine. I was like, well, funny, Doc didn't tell me. I remember him getting out of the boat and he goes, I mean, I'm out there rowing and it feels like someone's stabbing me in the back every stroke with a butter knife. And I'm thinking like, well, why the hell are you rowing then, Mike? And that was, again, like, that's the genius of Mike. I was like, yeah, I guess I'm rowing. And I got back into it. And the reason I started telling this story, Dan, then like we went through, we were in the matrix, right? And I wasn't doing particularly well. You were doing significantly better. But then we got back together and we were good. Do you remember that?
Yeah, dude. Yes.
We were
yeah.
like, what the hell happened? Like, I haven't been training for a month. Like, we were bad. And then we were all of a sudden, when we got paired up, we were good again. That was like a miracle, I think, sort of saved me in the group at that time.
Our investment paid off. Our investment in each other, our investment in our commitment, right? Like that to me is what rowing's all about. That's what this show is about. It's about you just decide to help will somebody else to be excellent and hope that you get to tag along in the finished result.
Yeah. Well, again, like I wouldn't have been there without you. So I am eternally
I wouldn't have been there without anybody in this whole group. Like
I'm just why you
before I
telling
start
that
crying,
I don't know. I think most of us remember, Justin excluded, like most of us remember being in a boat with Wyatt when he starts giggling and how you can feel like the whole boat. Like Wyatt, I'm just like listening to you tell that story. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like when Wyatt starts giggling in the boat, like the whole thing just bounces.
All right. Enough of the love. Enough.
So yeah. So Wyatt, take us though. Like you're obviously getting pretty deep into the cycle leading into 04. You're I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're there. It's not a happy to be there anymore. Now you're there, right? And stakes are kind of ratcheting up. If you could, can you kind of take us through that? Okay, now I'm no longer Mike's project, but I'm Mike's like, you're fine. Let's go. We're getting close. Every day is closer to the Olympic Games. Can you talk to us a little bit about that selection process for 04? Obviously, it's, world record, winning 8. But talk about like making that boat and kind of that process. And then, we'll get to the 04 games. And we've had a couple conversations with, some of your fellow boatmates, obviously on the shows prior, but would love to hear from your perspective. Like, okay, this, like, I'm happy to be here bit is now becoming like, okay, I'm in it. I'm dead in it. Like, what does that kind of feel like, look like? Surround.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah. The happy to be, you're spot on, right? The happy to be there moment sort of ended for me in that selection because like, okay, so I did okay in the pairs, right? And then I did pretty well in the straight 4 selection. I don't know, if you guys remember, we did some straight four, Cox four selection. And then I got selected to be part of this smaller group that went back. The weather broke in Princeton, and Mike decided he wanted to take, I think it was 10 to 12 guys back to Princeton, and I got inserted in that group. And we went back, and things were going pretty well. And then, it started to look like I was in the boat. But then I remember, and my memory isn't, I mean, some of the guests you guys have had on, they have like photographic memories. But I remember we were getting ready for the first NSR, and, I had a partner, and we were doing pretty well. And my partner got sick like the week before, maybe it was a week and a half before. And couldn't race. So I was without a partner for the first NSR, which was a big piece of the selection. And I remember, Corzo's request, we tell it like it is. And I remember Mike asking me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, Mike, I want to row with JR, because JR was coming back from, remember, he like fell off a keg or something. Of the eating clubs. So he was coming back from a knee injury or a wrist injury or whatever. And I rode with JR a couple of times, and it was really good. And I just was like, well, this makes sense. Like, everyone else has partners, I'll row with him. And I remember Mike said to me, he goes, I don't want you rowing with JR because he's not quite right, and you guys haven't rowed together, and I can't have either of you guys having a bad result. And I was like, okay, like, makes sense. So I'll go row the single. Next thing I know, Paul Tatey and JR were rowing together. Do you guys remember this?
No, but
And I was
kind
like,
of, yeah.
what the hell's going on? It was like, it was to me at that time, as, like a pretty young guy that was full of anxiety in the middle of Olympic selection, and all of a sudden feeling the pressure of like, it was mine to lose. I was like, okay, I feel like I'm on the outside looking in. And then I raced the single, and I didn't do that well because I wasn't rowing the single. And that had been like, in the buildup, that had been like my strength. Like, I was like, okay, as long as I can do well at the NSR and the singles, I've sort of established myself. And I remember I was in the B final. And so reality was setting in. I was like, I felt like I was an outsider in the sweep group. I wasn't to do well with sculling, and I sort of panicked. And I was like, that's when I went and I started rowing the double with Henry Newsom, and it was a big deal. And I remember Mike was furious at me, and I did that for a few days, and it, like, that double wasn't going well. I started to second guess my decision. So I ended up coming back into the sweep group after walking away for, probably the better part of a week. And thank God, again, talk about being lucky, the way that Mike was okay with me coming back to the group. I'm sure I pissed off some of the guys in the sweep group by coming and going. In general, people were really forgiving of that, right? And kind of understood it. And thank God then Henry went and rode with the keel, and they were a phenomenal double, right? So, if things hadn't worked out well for Henry, I would have that sort of guilt on my conscience. So, like, I feel really lucky in that regard. So, yeah.
Just a quick interjection. So the way you just told that, I don't want to. I want you to articulate it. You were in the sweep program, but you knew back pocket until it didn't. Until it kind of imploded. That you had a really strong sculling repertoire in you as almost a backup plan, right? If it's like, if this sweep thing doesn't work out, I'll jump back in the single or the double or whatever it may be, and still find your way to the games through an NSR or selection or qualifying. Is that kind of your mindset at that point? I mean, obviously it blows up on you with the B final, but just curious.
Yeah,
Because that's a really strong point of leverage compared to some of your peers, right? That are like sweep, ride or die.
Yeah, it was. And I think it was actually being forced to race the single and then not doing well and being like, holy smokes, to win a trial, I need to actually be preparing in that boat class on the sculling side of things. So I think it was like I've got no leverage. I feel like on the outside looking in the sweep group, and I feel like my leverage as a sculler is kind of slipping away on me. And I think that's what created that sort of panic. And yeah, I again, I look back on that. I'm not proud of that. And I'm not, and at the same time, I feel really lucky that it worked out for me, because I could have really screwed things up for myself and others.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, we had a keel on. So obviously you wound up it worked out okay for him with that move.
You did make him
But
nervous. He admitted you made him nervous.
yeah,
You
he
made
was a
him
little nervous. He was like,
Did
"Oh
that
yeah,
come
Wyatt
up?
coming back." Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to watch the episode, Wyatt.
Oh,
You're
well,
gonna
I
have
guess,
to watch the episode. We can't spoil it for you.
but I couldn't claim that never happened. None of that stuff happened.
So take us forward. So you're or sorry, Dan, go ahead.
It's for me, I think it's really clear, because I just heard you say something like, I'm not proud of that, right? And I think that one of the things, especially for any young athletes that are, watch this show, because the idea of this show is to be a resource for athletes that want to take the path and learn from this collective knowledge of how many different ways there are to be successful, is, dude, it's the Olympics. And we were fast. I think one of the things about especially the Princeton Training Center in that era is that the men's and women's eights for that 8 years was resetting the standard of speed for rowing, like international rowing, period. And, you have the Olympic records to prove it, like the first boats to break 520. It was within that moment where any day that you won a piece in Princeton, because all the women, all the men, all the lightweights, all the sculling was all in one place for the first time. So if you won a piece in Princeton at that time, you were the best in the world, right? You still have to have the luck on the day at World Championships or the Olympics. But I think that intensity, right, is like you have to do whatever it takes to make the Olympics. And sometimes that judgment is so self-centered that everybody's thinking that way. You know what I mean? Everybody's thinking that way. And I think that is just, it's your choice to talk about it. But I think I don't want you to feel unproud, because I don't think anybody looked at you that way of like, I think it was more like, fuck, man, he's so good that Mike basically said, yo, you're in the 8, stop sculling. That was the outside perspective. And the reason why your teammates were accepting of it is because we all wanted the Wyatt Allen effect in our boat. You know what I mean? You were that good. And so, yeah, it's not, I don't see it as a proud or not pride thing. I see that it's such an intense environment, and it was so deep in talent that you got to do whatever it takes to make it, right? It's the Olympics. It's one of the hardest things to do to be an Olympian. It's one of the hardest things to do to be a U.S. Olympian. And it's sure as hell one of the hardest things to do to win it. So good for you, right? Good for you. And at the end, it worked out, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I think there was always some sort of misconception that I was coming back with like some sort of guarantee of a C. And that was
No,
not,
you guaranteed.
that was not the case. Not that anyone's still talking about this, but let me clear the air.
Obviously we are.
So
Dude, all right. So Justin, sorry, take it away.
take us to that though, right? So Wyatt, you go from I'm just gonna to move us a little bit along, which I appreciate all the context. I think it's really integral to the story. When you found out that you had made the boat, right? Can you articulate that one for us too? Because I think that like that's a really interesting inflection point for a lot of the guests on the show. Obviously, you go from soccer, lacrosse, self-described like, probably not going to make a D3 team but had obviously an athletic, plant to you from a competitive standpoint. You do all these steps, and now all of a sudden, like you're flying to Athens. Like, can you just tell us about that? Who'd you call? Like, what was that moment? And we've had a lot of. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'd love to hear from you. There's a lot of interesting responses when we ask this question.
Yeah. I don't think I have a terribly interesting story or response to that. I just remember, and I've seen this time and time again from guys like I've coached, I just remember feeling like I had been holding off my family for so long on like making plans or buying tickets for that thing. I just remember being so happy to be able to call in and be like, yeah, start booking flights, right? It was calling my mom and my dad and breaking that news to them, which I think they were like, they had, as parents often do, like they had gotten ahead of me on all that. And I had been pumping the brakes on them. So I don't know. That was a really cool moment. But yeah, I feel like that was more of like,
So, you know, again, like we've had some of your boatmates, and I want to get to the next cycle where I come in, but we've had some of your
Who's the narcissist
boatmates
now?
on. Well, I'm trying to be a little more cheeky about it, right? Like, I guess my question is do you want to set the record straight? Like, we're 20 years on. There's some rose-colored glasses. You've listened to your boatmates tell stories. You've listened to, like, you know, JR talking about being the first guy to cross the finish line, and you've, you know, Volp tells his story about, guys, I'm warm. You know, like, is there anything about that whole experience, rather than just take us through the whole race, right? Like, is there anything about that where you want to set the record straight of like, I remember it this way? Or you want to call out Joey, or, you know,
no, I don't think I've heard anyone say anything inaccurate. I think
no
all
tall
those,
tales there, or
yeah, all those stories are true. Other than Mike saying we did, I forget what the number is. He says we did 1 million starts. You know, the Canadians were fast. So
Yeah,
we did,
he forgot that coaching lesson going into 08.
we should have done more of that.
Yeah, we should have followed that rule.
yeah. Well, we didn't in '04. It was just sort of a good story afterwards. But I think all those stories are true, and some of them sound so ridiculous, like you can't believe it happened. But that boat was such a cool collection of characters and so fun to be a part of. And I think is, you know, one of the young guys in that crew that was just following their lead, they made it incredibly fun and incredibly easy to stay somewhat relaxed in such a high pressure environment. You know, it's like that Ed Hewitt telling the story of us pulling in for the heat and guys like waving high and cracking jokes and laughing. Like that was all true. And, like I look back on it and it was like I didn't, like that's all I knew at the elite level was those guys and acting that way. So it just came kind of natural to do the same and again follow their lead. And I think that's why that crew was as successful as we were. You know, it was fun along the way. It was always kind of loose, right? And loose and fast. And you know, Steve, the amount of times that JR had me laughing, I remember like I put the coaching shield on a lot of guys in that boat because I was sort of the most technically challenged. And I remember Mike like would be riding me, and at the same time, JR would be cracking jokes behind me, and I would be like trying to stifle that laughter. I'm like just barely able to hold it together as Mike's like on me every stroke. But I think that like, you know, like that in some ways made me loose when Mike would go away, right? And helped me develop during that year. So yeah, no record to set straight. I mean, I think all those stories are true, and I don't know. I just think it's cool that I got to be there in person and witness them.
There's one.
Go ahead.
There's one more thing that because the next coming back is always an interesting thing, especially after something as epic as setting an Olympic record and winning. But to really, because this is your show and it's about you and it's reminding you what you're capable of, and because of like these characteristics are in you and they get developed in this crucible of the U.S. national team. I remember really clearly talking to you in Bulgaria because I think that the resilience of what it takes to be there is so different. But there was that practice that you caught a crab, and I remember like you came, and I remember getting dinner afterwards, right, in that like crazy hotel we lived in with the water park, right, and so, and and you looking upset and being like, what's up? He's like, Mike just made me watch me catch a crab in practice like for 2 hours.
No, he had it queued up on the projector in the dinner room in that Bulgarian hotel. So when I walked in, what was the first thing I saw? And you would rewind it and fast forward, or rewind it and play, rewind it and play.
Like as coaches and like corporate leaders, right? Like I just think about that, like that practice of like, hey, we're trying to win this thing and you're messing it up. Hey, this is you messing it up again. Hey, on the replay, you messed it up. That's just so brutal. How brutal that must have had to go through.
Yeah. And that was in real time. I think that's the only time I ever raised my voice back at Mike, because I remember him go, we finished and he was like, what happened? And someone was like, well, we caught a digger. And I said, Mike, it was me. And he goes, we can't do that. I know, Mike. I didn't mean to do it. It was almost moment where it's like, hey, you can't do that. I'm like, no shit. I'm going to try not to do it. So, yeah. Yeah, but I think that's, like, to your point, Dan, like, we were, again, like, we rode for some lunatics, right? Like Chris and Ted and Mike and, I mean, who am I missing here?
There's two Chris's. There's two Chris's.
Two Chris's.
That I actually think had positive influence on speed despite their lunacy. Yeah, Mike, Chris, Nash, Nielsen. But then I think there was this core thing that JR and Volpe, the reason why they had this relaxation that they brought into that 04 cycle was Jimmy Tompkins coaching them, pretty much just them, and teaching them how to relax under pressure, because Jimmy at that point was the most decorated oarsman next to Redgrave. So like when you have somebody that's won a gold medal in every sweep event ever, is just like, yeah, man, surf, relax, have fun. That is one thing that I think we missed from those lunatics, but JR and Volpe were able to bring that into the 04 cycle, right? They just knew somebody that had done it better than anybody, tell them to have fun.
Yeah. And then they could actually separate us from some of the incredible moments out on the water rowing for those lunatics. And I say lunatics in a positive way, but
yes, I agree. I do too.
And then you could walk in the locker room and they would make you laugh about it. Right. And so it wasn't the attacks weren't personal. Tim McLaren, another guy we got the row for. Sometimes I sit back and I go, these are some of the great characters in our sport. And in some ways, you're not allowed to coach like that anymore. And I think some of that is good, and some of it creates a void of, like, I don't know. Mike yelled at me, but I never thought it was always trying to get the best out of me, or it was trying to put me under pressure and teach me how to respond under extreme pressure. And that was really important. Like, I think one of the things that helped me as an athlete was I was able to step back and go, yeah, that's why he's doing it. So like, I don't he doesn't really mean I'm a total idiot and a waste of time, like that sort of thing. And so I don't know. I feel I'm thankful that we rode when we did, for the characters that we rode for. At the time we rode for them, because I think there's a lot that I in that experience credit for making me who I am and making us who we were. Does that make sense?
It's also a self-selecting group, right? It's the people who didn't take it personally are the ones that were able to survive the longest. And so, if you were able to recognize it and say, this is not, just poking buttons to see then you were able to handle it. But there were plenty of people who could have been nurtured along the way who did take it personal and who did flame out.
You're right.
And then there's Dan, who's a little bit of both.
And that's what I mean. I'm not saying, we shouldn't evolve and coaching shouldn't evolve and all that. I 100% believe that. And you are.
The problem is everyone nowadays will take it personally.
Yeah.
And there's no, and there's no self-selecting that.
And but I also had to go through a lot of work to realize that like that was me, right? Like I chose to take it personally. Like like I did, to your point, I thickened the skin a little bit, right? But it's like I agree with both of you, and I would love to have a deep coaching conversation. But this is your athletic journey, right? And we have the winning of the Diamond Skulls, going back to the Olympics, rocking, going fast in the erg. And I think that everyone's point is correct, and that's why we're here, because we are the evolution of it, right? We are saying like, hey, some of this stuff that these guys did wasn't all bad. And collectively we're here together to say like, but we all made it, and how can we help each other and athletes in the future? So I just want to like level set the conversation, because Luke, you have a really good point, because you and I shared the sensitive side, right? Like, nurturing would have made us better faster versus having to overcome it, I think. But I don't want to speak for you.
No, and I mean, this is what I was going to say a second ago. I don't necessarily want to gloss over the fact that there's a lot more story, Wyatt, that you have after 2004. But it's really interesting where this is headed, because you made the point. I don't think that a lot of the ways that could be coached we could be coached that way now. And Steve, you're saying, yeah, there's certain aspects of it. I don't know if we need to put a pin in this and come back to it. I definitely don't want to lose this. But I'm fascinated to know from you, and I think Steve's going to have a lot of insight as well. It's like, what are the do's and don'ts now? Like, what are you able to carry forward that you learned from your time, and how you guys were, handled it with humor, and how you met it? And what do you see in young people now in terms of their ability or openness to handle it in a certain way? Because, yeah, I mean, we would agree that some of the stuff we can barely repeat on the podcast in terms of the way we were coached and what was said to us, and so, you just can't do it that way. It's just it's not available now. So, I mean, I
No, I mean, unpack it, dude. Like, I mean, I obviously, like, look, we're gonna talk about coming back after 04. We're gonna touch on obviously going back in 08, and then certainly we want to know what you're up to now, Wyatt. But like, this is a really key component, right? And I think obviously now as a head coach, Wyatt, it's really important to hear your voice. You've obviously taken a program to another level from where you found it. So I'd love to hear, like, what's your take on that? And, obviously you're in the presence of other coaches, right? So myself excluded, but I would love to hear it.
Yeah. And look, I want to be clear. Like, yeah, there's a line, right? And we have to evolve. And more of my point was, I appreciate some of the ways in which I was tested and pushed and prodded. And I think that coaches have to be more careful. We have to be more careful in this day and age. And what I find is, the art and the challenge of adapting to different groups and evolving times is figuring out how you can insert that into your coaching and who you can insert that into your coaching with. And to your points of how different people respond to different ways of being motivated and coached and pushed. And that's what I find really challenging is, managing a team of 45 guys and having the way that I like to be pushed and have my buttons pushed by coaches, and realizing that that's not appropriate or not beneficial or not going to be received in the right way by everyone. And so how do you keep that part of your personality and your own sort of athletic mentality and infuse that into the group in a way that works for the entire group? And I don't know if I'm articulating it the right way, but it's a real fun challenge. And I find there are guys that, Billy Bender, our guy at Dartmouth who was in the Paris, like I could really give it to him. And I think he, I think he appreciated being coached that way. And that's not true of everyone in my program anymore. right? And so I have to be very skillful and artful, and I hope I am in how I do that, and give that to the guys who need it and want it, and don't give it to the athletes that don't and aren't going to benefit from it. Does that all make sense?
It does. It does. And
Yeah.
That was genuine though, and I don't see anything there. Like that was completely, and that's the art, like you said, that is the art of how do you create a culture where everyone knows that everyone is pushing to find speed, and they trust that you as the coach are trying to find ways to push them to new heights, and you're navigate they all know you're navigating it. Like,
I think that that's indicative. I mean, just as I listen to that, I think I'd say the same thing as Steve said, where like as I listen, I'm like, okay, so you have an athlete that's like, give it to me, coach. Like, I need this. This is what, like, you can yell at me, keep me on the path, like, because I want to do it at the highest level. I mean, he obviously wants to do it at the highest level, and he did it at the highest level and has done it at the highest level and responded well to that. What's interesting about that is this group sitting here is like, yeah, all makes sense. Opposed against sort of where society has gone, where administration has gone, like this sort of like, hey, there are things that, this sort of this tightrope that has to be walked. And so I guess the question is like, has the pendulum swung so far in the other direction where it's gone from like, hey, in our time, it was just like, you were going to hear some stuff that was going to be guaranteed. There were quotables by the end of any practice in Princeton where you're like, did that actually just happen? Did the coach really just say that? Like, and we've gone to this point where it's like swung the other direction. And, I work with high school athletes, and I definitely see it in a high school side. Like, have we gone so far to one end that you have almost too much protection of individuals that then doesn't allow for us to really sort of embrace the true hard edges and the struggle that is rowing? Like our athletes, I'm constantly working with high school athletes, and I'm like, we got to get you guys equipped for adversity, and we got to get you equipped for the struggle, and we've got to get you to understand that like there's a real world out there, and at best, nobody cares about you, and at worst, they're going to try to stop you. So like we got to get you, once you get outside of the bubble of your parents and your schools and your teams, like how are we equipping them for that? So I'm just curious like what it is to walk that, because like Wyatt, I didn't hear anything that you said right now that I was like, oh boy, we should probably take this out of the video. But I 100% understand why you would be like, that could be received the wrong way. Because like so much of the world now is not what your intent is. It's how someone or a group of people chooses to receive it, right? And it's like, your intent is clear as day. I've got this guy, he's a hard charger. I can yell at him and he responds to that. And it's like, yeah, makes sense to me. Like moving on to the next. But like, it's just fascinating. So do you guys, like Steve, you as well, when you guys are in the culture that exists, especially at the collegiate level, does it feel like, okay, I've got to evolve to a certain point, but at the same time, like there's still elements of things that I need to do to help these kids, really embrace the suck of the whole thing. Because rowing doesn't, I mean, you strip it all down, rowing's an exercise in pain management, and you're not going to manage pain by talking your way through it. And, you have to develop the relationship with it. So yeah, I don't know. Thoughts on that? Or, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it really quickly. I think you articulated it incredibly well, right? It is, all the aversion to risk has sort of diluted coaching in a certain way, right? And that's, I just feel like I coach carefully sometimes, right? And I hate doing that. And I feel like when I coach carefully, I'm not giving the guys everything I have to give them, right? And I'm not giving them that resiliency. I'm not giving them that toughness. I'm not giving them the ability to really receive harsh, real, constructive criticism. And I in some ways that's a you feel like you're doing it, you understand why, but in some ways you feel like you're doing a disservice as well. I think that's the challenge of coaching sort of
Yeah.
in modern times. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
I mean, I think we surround ourselves with people who are going to respond to our personalities. And it takes time to build a culture. And what's impressive with you from watching, from afar and watching you go do it and build it is it takes a while to find athletes who don't need to be yelled at all the time. So then when it does come out, they're like, yeah. And and it starts to get fun when you don't have to when you're not like sitting there and you're like, if I just yell at them for like 3 months, we'll be good. But like, that's going to be horrendous. Right. And so, I think part of it is, and like Hillary said it a little bit when we interviewed her, where, she's talking about like, I wish, like, you start to see where things are going, right? And you've had some great success right now, but then you're also like, man, like, I wish we could have had that success for some of these people that you had early on when you were building the program,
Absolutely.
who were right there, but
Who did the
then,
heavy lifting, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And cause I mean, we're starting our year and I'm sitting in the office having like first day of classes was Monday, and I'm talking to the captains and they're like, talking about how they want to be better at, holding each other accountable. They want to be better at like calling out the little things so we can move the needle. And, I think it takes a while to surround yourselves with like the right type of people. And that's kind of what I meant by saying, like, even like around like our group, it was kind of self-selecting, where it just takes time to build that. And then you had this golden group that could just like laugh it off when Mike was sitting there and saying, oh, this is what they need, right? Partly because that's all he knew, right? But he's like, this is what they need. And you had guys who could just laugh it off. And we didn't always have that. And there were some awesome people who like would get really, really pissed and really take it personally. And you could sit there and just like kind of, sometimes it would be even more fun when you were the type of person who wasn't taking it personally.
You guys
I
are
think
you guys are crushing it. And if I may, Luke, because I think that I have been in rowing since I was 10 years old. Right. And now I'm 46. And I've done almost every job in rowing. And as this outside observer of this beautiful sport, and I've had it, and you guys have been part of me on my mental health with this thing, right? So much of mine is just unique, but to sum up the observation of what needs to evolve from both the coach's side and the athlete side to really get to excellence is one is Mike, Tim, Corzo, all those names that we had, I think they're all brilliant coaches in their own right. But my frustration was always that the people that were super sensitive that weren't, like, I'm super sensitive. You guys can all attest to that. But I had a toughness that allowed me to work through it. Is that the depth of our talent in the US team has never been manifested because we rely on this way of just beating it and beating it and beating it as the rest of the world has tried to do, not soften the athletes, but respect them more for the effort that they put in. And that Mike's brilliance or any of that intensity that came from the 80s is it was a respect thing, not an intensity thing. The way that they push buttons in some ways was insulting and demeaning and all that stuff. And so I think that evolution is when I hear, like you, Wyatt, says, I feel like I have to be careful with my coaching is I do believe you and Steve, when you're saying you're being careful, you want to be careful at the athletes to be able to make sure that you're meeting them where they are. And it's really difficult to do that now, to Luke's point, which is the kids are overprotected by society and their parents. But also there's a lot of coaches out there that are careful for themselves. And I think that's the difference between being a good coach and a good leader is that you meet the athletes where they are to make as many of them rise to the top as possible. A good coach just tries to make a fast boat, and they'll do anything they can to make that boat fast. And that's where we've really separated the two. And that people try to compare the success that we had at PTC as the only way to do it. And it's like, well, if you're trying to build the team, it's actually not the way to do it. Right? We were good teammates, but we weren't a team, because that drop off, going full circle of, yeah, if you're not in the 8, you're the JV. Well, guess what? Andy Hodge thought he was the man in the straight 4, right? Pinsett and Cracknell thought they were the shit in the pair. Like, you go against somebody that thinks they're the world's best, and you feel like you're a JV rower because you're an Olympian. Like, that's our problem, right? That was our problem, and that manifested into, well, the only way to go fast, like the guys in 04 and 08, is to beat the shit out of them. And it's like, they're exceptional talent, like, part of the show is like, it's exceptional talent that was able to survive that. And we can't use that roadmap to develop a foundational program that helps now 10-year-olds, because there's rowing in middle school, through high school, and say, like, when I hear high school coaches, when I talk to them, oh, I'm doing the national team workout with my high school kids. I'm like, what are you, an idiot? Like, that broke me. Like, I'm one of the toughest dudes in rowing. Like that broke that's some of the best rowers I've seen. Why are you doing that to kids? And I think that's what we need to, and I think, Luke, you do an incredible job bridging that gap, but you can see it when you express it, how exhausting it is, because these young people are scared. And I do know intimately what it's like to be scared in that environment. And if you are scared and you are sensitive, then my advice to you is learn to toughen up. Because if you want to be great, if I had to do it, you got to do it. But I think coaches can do a much better job of identifying sensitivity as a superpower versus a detriment.
Well, you guys can correct me if you think differently about this, but kind of like the way that I've sort of distilled it and kind of where I'm at is like, rowing is hard. I tell my athletes all the time, rowing's hard and rowing is fun, and those things are not mutually exclusive. They're actually connected, and the joy in rowing is embracing the hard, right? As coaches, I think we'd all agree we don't necessarily, we didn't necessarily ourselves see the benefit in receiving coaching, nor do we see the benefit in giving coaching that's demeaning or, just downright nasty or challenging. And so I always chalk that up to, like, we don't need to make rowing harder than it is, but we also don't need to make it easier, right? And so, like, Wyatt, I think that really goes to your point that, like, the athletes need to be in a place where they can receive and use the word, constructive criticism. And I would just say, people, oh, criticism, maybe even that's a controversial word right now. So it's like feedback. Can an athlete receive real, true feedback, honest feedback about, you failed today? This did not go right. We are not here for this. What we brought today, this is not it. And so I feel like we don't need to make it harder.
Yes.
But we surely should not make it easier, because rowing is a hard sport and people need to be equipped for it.
Yeah. And we have to remember, like, sometimes, like, you can't cross the line into, like, being demeaning, right? Like, there's a difference between being harsh and encouraging and demeaning. And when you are pushing yourself to the edge, you are in a very emotionally vulnerable place, because when you're exerting yourself that hard, there is, like, that transference, that stress on the brain, and there's that transference to where, like, anything can be just taken the wrong way, and you want to see someone at their most vulnerable, look at them in the last 500 meters of a 2K, and you could instantly say the wrong thing. And, we all have wives who've gone through childbirth, and it's like, you say the wrong thing, and suddenly it's like, what did you say? So, like, it's just, you're at your most vulnerable. And so you have to be careful when you're dealing with people who are at their most vulnerable.
So I think awesome discussion to bring it back to vulnerability.
The Wyatt story.
To vulnerability.
Yeah.
And really giving your best self. Wyatt, you put your best self out there, set a world record, you win Olympic gold medal. Then there's the what next. What was next?
You lose your medal in a cab. Wait, if I remember
you'll tell us about
correctly, there was the drug testing.
But Like,
were you the who was the one person from the 8 that was singled out afterwards that like everyone's celebrating and then had to report to doping control? It was you. It is your
Was me.
story. So that was what was next.
okay,
Yep. And the
you got
story,
yeah, go ahead.
Luke, I couldn't eat breakfast the morning. Oh my God, I forgot this was you. I couldn't eat breakfast. I was so nervous the morning of the race, and I got down to the boathouse, and all of a sudden I was starving, and I was like, Luke, do you have any goo? You gave me a unmarked packet of goo Roctane before it was on the market, and I didn't think anything of it, and I just took it and slammed it, and then raced, and then they pulled my name for drug testing. I'm like, I just put an unmarked substance into my body 40
Which
minutes
was
before
totally
the
safe, by the way. Like I wouldn't be taking it otherwise. So, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, it was the
But talk
early
about-
version of gels, the early version
Talk
of energy
about
gels.
someone being emotionally vulnerable post 2K,
Yeah.
and your brain goes so natural.
Hey guys,
segue.
I didn't catch a crab, but I
Busted a
did
drug
take an
test, so-
I took
Walton
an
gave me
unmarked
this
energy gel.
stuff. So you obviously passed. Gold medal
Yes.
stands.
Yeah,
But after he was, dude, they were we were all on the beach celebrating as Team USA, right? The best part about it is like once the men's and women's 8s had medals, everybody was like, dude, this is amazing for America, right? Like the nationalism really set forward and everyone's celebrating. And then like every 15 minutes, someone's like, yo, where's Wyatt? And the dude's still just for hours just trying to go to the bathroom to celebrate being the best in the world. And he just is alone.
they sent me into Athens to give blood. And I remember I got into this waiting room and I sat in this waiting room for like 2.5 hours. And maybe the race was at 11 a.m. And I showed up at the Bank of America USA house. And I walked in and it was like the party was over. It was like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Everyone's just like sitting around like, when can we go home? I'm like, hey, I'm here.
So you can tell us about how you lost your medal in a cab real quick. And then I do want to get to 05 because I think it's really interesting that you get out of an 8.
Yeah, so it wasn't in a cab. I went home that night and stayed at my family's Airbnb in Athens. They all woke up and flew out the next morning, and it was my job to check out of the Airbnb. And I left the medal on the dining room table. I walked out of the Airbnb, closed the door, locked it, and dropped the key in a mailbox that then I couldn't get the key back out of. Call. I had to like email my mom and get the phone number of the Airbnb owner. And we were supposed to be on the Today Show that morning. And I got super delayed, obviously. And I showed up. I remember it was in a square and it was set. And I showed up and like I was probably 5 minutes before they were actually going on air. And I showed up and there was this huge bodyguard. And I was like, I'm like jumping around, looking over his shoulders. I could just see the guys off in the distance. I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to be in there. And the guy's like, yeah, right. And I actually had to like dig the medal out and show. I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be with those 8 guys over there. Finally got in and, remember I kind of shuffled into the lineup, right? And it became and no one told me anything. They were just like, oh, you're here, get in, stand next to JR. And the host, Katie Couric, went by person and was like, had a question for each of them, like, oh, Chris, you were in the boat in 2000, what does it mean to you? And Bulb, you're stroking, what is that? And then they got to me, and I was laughing. They're like, and Wyatt, how are you? I was like,
You're like, well, let me tell you about my morning.
okay, thanks. The next one. That was my appearance on the Today Show.
That's amazing. So you get back. That story's gold, by the way.
Literally gold.
Glad you got
Literally
yeah,
gold.
literally gold. Yeah. So you get back stateside, I'm assuming, and did you have this kind of like inflection point? We've talked to a lot of other guests that have kind of hit that moment of like, now what? Or was it like, no, like I got to come back, or was like what got you into the single? Because so just for the audience, so in 2005, Wyatt rose a single at Henley, which is super prestigious singles event to be in, and basically is like, if you win that, you're kind of, the fast, yeah, not kind of like you're the fastest single sculler basically, in the world, or top one of the top guys in the world, the single scull. Totally different than a sweep boat, totally different than an 8. So yeah, like what was that transition? What was like the impetus for that kind of trajectory for that? And then, just talk us through that, for a sec, because I'd love to kind of hear that. And then the pivot back into a sweep boat, obviously with Steve and Dan, as you look to the next games.
Yeah, I think no, I don't think there wasn't sort of that moment of what next. I knew that I wanted to give the single a run. I was just fascinated by it. I really enjoyed training at it and racing it. So it was pretty straightforward. I took, maybe 3 weeks off and then started training again in the single and loved it. The Henley thing, look, I was fortunate. It wasn't, you look at the field of this year's Henley, it's a bunch of monsters. The year that I won it, it was a much easier path. So there was some luck along the way.
No offense, Wyatt. I
No.
mean, I appreciate that, but
No.
like, you don't just win that race and it's a bunch of bullshit. Like, let's be honest. Like, sorry
Yeah.
to ruin your humbleness, but like,
Yeah.
So
still-
can we turn it
still did
around, Wyatt?
If
That
they're-
also
and if
that,
they're-
that
and if
kind
they're a
of puts
bunch of
down anyone
monsters-
you beat. That puts down anyone you beat. You beat
Yeah.
some good people.
I did. Yeah. But at the same time, I clearly, look, I wasn't a top 6 sculler in the world at that point. Right. And so there were a bunch of guys that could have entered and beaten me. I do.
It was the
I
extra.
know that,
It was the extra 180 meters.
Yeah, exactly. Just a good dual single elimination sculler.
Okay, so you win that event, you're back in the single, and then do you go back to Princeton and train with the sculling squad, or you like transition back into sweeps?
Yeah, no, I was back at Princeton training with Chris Korzeniowski, and prepped, and actually that was a really long. I raced at a World Cup, and then I went to Henley. I raced a Munich World Cup and I think I finished 9th or 10th at that World Cup, and that was my first international race. That was also Mahe Drysdale's first regatta in the single. I remember that. Chris Nielsen was coaching the Kiwis. He's like, yeah, we got this guy. We think he's okay. Ended up being better than okay. And then I raced at Henley, and then I raced trials. And then I had, because it was slow conditions, there was a hard and fast time standard, and I had to then come back and hit the time standard a week later. And then that was the year that World Championships were in Gifu, Japan, and ended up going over there and not doing very well at all, and just feeling like I was running out of steam by the time I got there. So I did that, and then actually it was, being honest with you, I was going to lose my funding if I stayed in the single. So I was, I made the decision to go in the team boats and scull at the '06 World Championships in Eton in the quad. And actually, that was a pretty good boat. I want to say we finished eighth or ninth. But we showed some good speed. That was the first U.S. quad in a while that in our heat, we led the Italians, who ended up medaling, and they walked through us in like the last 150 meters. So that was kind of the first quad that showed some, first U.S. quad in a couple of years that had shown some real speed. And then that group really became the foundation for that good quad we had in 2008. So yeah, I did that. And then I'm trying to be a little bit more concise going forward for you guys. But 7,
it is a little rinse and repeat, so it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, really, it came down to, Justin, I think this is your original question. Like, I wanted to win medals, and the most direct path to winning a medal at that time in the U.S. was the 8. And so after 2006, I went back to sweeping and was in the 8 in '07 with Dan and Steve, right?
A little bit of
and
romper room.
qualified the boat there. There was no natural kind of easy speed in that lineup, I think. Is that
No.
fair to say, guys? And
No,
I actually,
that well
was,
that whole thing is built back to, and this is a whole nother topic, and it's to not get into the weeds, but it goes back to like the difference between being a good coach and a good leader. And we were trying to bring the depth deeper into the 8 and still not quite putting the right people in the right boats. And I think going back to like how hard it is to win the Olympics is we were trying to spread out the talent and bring up the development at that point. But it's, we did not, I don't like to diminish anybody who made it to raced at Worlds, especially an Olympic event. Like it's so difficult. And I think at the time we used to beat ourselves up for that. But if you're gonna win the 8, you need your best 8 athletes in it. And we just didn't have the fastest 8 athletes in that 8. But we won our semi, and I think we shot our shot to try and win it and ran out of gas and got 4th. But we qualified, right? We qualified, and that was a big deal. Like, I think we have to do a whole series on how important the qualifying year is, but like qualifying anything the year before the Olympics resets the whole entire tone going into the Olympic year because you can train on the same training program. You don't have that certain qualifier. So, yes, we didn't medal, but we were fast, and we just weren't putting together a complete race yet. That's my recollection.
yeah. And I think it was, I agree with everything you said. And I think it was not a natural kind of easy. We all been in lineups that have easy speed. That boat did not have easy speed, right? And I just remember being both proud of that performance and relieved that we qualified the 8, we qualified the 4, right? We put out a good performance, right? And I don't know. I think there's,
But there is, and this is what I'm really excited for because you have been coaching, you have built an incredible program at Dartmouth, and we get to this '08 year, and you and I have spent so many nights kind of talking about this and with Steve. And so take us through '08, and what I'm most interested in is like as a coach now and through that lens, as we got through the '08 cycle, what do you think were some of the things that we did better? Because in training, we were faster on paper than '04, but in execution at the Olympics, right, we were that 1.2 seconds short. Not that I think about that every day. From your perspective of being in both those boats, tell us what you think we did really well as a team, and that what that medal means to you compared to gold, and what are things that you think we could have done better?
I think there's a lot of things we could have done better, right? And that's individually. I think that's, as a team, as a group, but, you can point to stuff the coaching staff could do better, right? And I say that knowing darn well that there are years my team can say that about me and be spot on. I think I just remember '08, the selection being really messy. And it was really messy because there was a lot of depth and a lot of parity. And I think that slowed us down. I just remember there were lineups that I was in that were supposed to be the lineup and didn't beat the other 8 by enough. And then there were lineups that I was outside of that started to look like the lineup. And we would sell our souls to keep it tight. I mean, do you remember how many times we were in 2/8s and we would finish 3 to 4 seats apart over 2K? Like I just
Yeah,
feel
and
it was,
they were also sub 4 minutes by a lot, like 3:55 and 3:56.
and they were all fast, but at the same time, it was this challenge. I remember being like, God, these times are fast, but do we have 2 medal winning 8s in camp right now? Maybe, but like, I don't know. You feel like if you're an Olympic, medalist 8, that you should be able to really kind of manhandle any other boat coming out of your camp. So I think that, that's almost everyone looks at depth and competitiveness as an advantage. And in general it is, but there are times when it can muddy the water so
Yeah.
much that it
Not when you have
becomes a
to
disadvantage.
cut 8 of them. I said, not when you're trying to when you got to cut 8 of them. Like if you're trying to win 2 events, it's great.
Yeah. 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 And you and I, Steve, have certainly been, and Dan, you've had this at the coaching level. You can't get a separation. You can't get any separation between your varsity and your JV. But at the end of the day, to your point, Steve, you're not cutting everyone that's not in that top boat, right? Uh, so I that to me was sort of the biggest challenge that maybe got the better of us in that year and kept us. That was just really challenging. And me personally, this ties into where we just came from. I felt like I was running on fumes by the time we got to 8. And I look back and I go, I think it all started for me and how quickly I came back and wanted to row the single in 2005. Right. And I just remember this feeling of being like, and you know me, I was a trainer, like I loved to train, but I remember by the time we got to Beijing, I was like, man, I'm physically tired. And I think I did that to myself. And I just say that to say, like, again, you, Dan, like you and I have had this conversation. You look at that, like, that margin from gold medal and the tiny difference between us and the silver medal. And like that, I, I don't know, is it fair to say has eaten away at you for a long time. And I look at that, and of course, maybe it's easier for me because I had '04 and I had that gold medal in my back pocket, but I'm really proud of what we accomplished because again, I just know that process for me personally and for us as a group was, I think, way more challenging than it was in '04. And I think we overcame some circumstances that were out of our control and some mistakes that were in our control. And I think we overcame it and had a really pretty awesome performance. And I'm really proud of that. I don't, does that all make sense?
Yeah, dude. Oh, I mean, look, it means a lot to me, right? It's like in some ways, like only you, Bo, and Volp, right, can ease that. It does hurt. It will always hurt. A lot of the work that I had to do is like it consumed me, right? And part of this show for me was that I was not appreciating the beautiful life that rowing had given me because of that 1.2 seconds, because I felt that I was unstoppable in that year. I wasn't exhausted. I wanted revenge for not being in the 8 and '04, right? I felt like I deserved to be in that. I felt like I should have raced in '04. I felt like I got robbed of that. And you know, time heals all wounds to an extent, but there's scars. And one of the things I've learned through the therapy I've done for it, and having this validation outwardly as somebody that needs it, is it's my choice of if I want that pain to be a 10 or a 1. Right. And so when we talk, and that's part of the toughness, right, of this show for me, is going through it and being like, why am I ever going to be upset about being the third fastest in the world at anything? And why, well, because it's got to hurt when it doesn't happen if you want to get it. It's just it's part of the price you pay to want to be the best in the world, right? It's got to suck when you don't win. And as Luke said, it's pain management. And but it helps to have fast friends tell you you're fast, because we were still fast. We just weren't the fastest that day. And if we raced that race 10 more times, we would have won it. We would have. And I think, you know, you articulate it so well. And I don't know if you remember this, but like we were on the podium and you put your arm around me because you saw me in my little grumpy, and I had become Eeyore and you were Tigger. And I think you had this relief that it was over and you had these 2 Olympic medals and your hero's journey was over. And you just put your arm around me, man. And you're like, dude, this in some ways is more important than the gold because we had to work so hard for it. It was an athlete driven success. It was an athlete driven success. And so I think that means a lot to me. I think that's going to mean a lot to athletes that hear that. I think that's why your team at Dartmouth does so well. And, you've been giving us so much time, and I want to be really mindful of that. So a couple key questions I want to ask you. And these can be rapid fire if you want, but dude, take us on another yarn if you would like. But you are one of the most impressive rowers ever. Like, you just are. And what do you think was your edge against all of us? Like, what did Wyatt Allen have? my theory on this is that to make it into that system, to make it to the Olympic podium, you have to have one thing that you think you're the best in the world out than everybody else, even amongst the best in the world. So what is your edge?
I'm proud of my career. I don't think, I think I was a product of the people I got to row with in the system, and you described it, how good that system was. And the 2/8s that I was in, man, I was lucky to be around everyone that was in those. If I had an edge that helped me get to where I was, to me, I always felt like I was extremely consistent as an athlete. Like my top end wasn't as good as, let's use Dan Beery for example. Like if I had to bet on someone for one piece at a most important time, it would be Dan Beery. But I think, maybe over 5 pieces, I could close that gap on him. It was kind of like I would, I always wanted to be the one seat raced on the 3rd or 4th piece because I just felt physiologically I was able to reproduce really well and I was able to train very consistently. So I think that was sort of my edge, the consistency with which I was able to train, the consistency. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I could repeat 98% better than other people. Maybe my 100% wasn't as good as other people, but I could repeat at 98% until the cows came home. That, just thinking of me as an athlete and my time training and competing, I feel like that was sort of my advantage. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And we had Dan on the show. His episode is quite interesting. Shout out to early episodes of Fast Friends.
Beery
And
coming in.
He did
Came in
talk
hot.
about
Came in hot.
Yeah.
being good for that
Hurricane,
one.
man.
Yeah.
And so real quick, Dan and Steve, having rode with Wyatt, like when someone is that consistent, right? Dan, you were talking about the Wyatt effect, right? Do you guys agree with that? That like every chance that you got to row in Wyatt's boat, you're like, oh, this is going to be good because Wyatt's going to just. What is the Wyatt effect that you were referring to, Dan? Does that resonate with what Wyatt's describing right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so humbling and beautiful and also empowering to see this unfold the way it is. But yeah, dude, I mean, you wanted you in the boat because it was like, whether it's consistent or unrelenting, I don't know which is a better way to describe it.
I was only ever allowed to row with Wyatt in 8s. I was never allowed to row with Wyatt in a smaller boat. We were always on opposite sides of the bracket, and we would meet together in the 8.
It's true. But I think, again, sorry to go on about myself. Like,
That's why you're here. That's why you're here.
That's what Mike saw in me. Like, I think he knew, I don't think Mike thought I was the best per se, but I think Mike knew he was going to get pretty darn good every time he put me out there. And I think Mike valued that in an athlete, right? I didn't have as big as swings and I didn't have as many bad days as maybe someone else. Again, like that's something I, of course, appreciate about Mike, that I think he saw that in me and valued that. Right?
I mean, you won
definitely
so many erg tests. You won so many erg test days, right? In training, you would be the top starboard, right? Like on 2K, on 6K, on hours, right? So I think that consistency is not just like the.
Except for when Brian tried.
I caught up with him today just because I was like, Wyatt's coming on. He's like, good. So anyway, the joke was with Brian is that there are some people that Brian had to be his best to beat. He couldn't take an easy day. Some of them are on this call, like on this show. Yes, if Brian tried, but there were certain people that Brian had to try.
Yeah, has Dan told you guys the story of the build up to one of the NSRs in 2008 when Dan and I were in the pair together? So it was probably it was the last hard workout we were going to do before the NSR, and we went out and we did. I think there were 1500s, right? And he'd set it up bracket style, and Dan and I went out and won the one side of the bracket and Volp and JR won the other side of the bracket. But our time was significantly faster than JR and Volp's. And I remember, like, I just remember paddling around and Mike, like, looking at his watch, and, like, doing, like, the dumbfounded face. And then he sent the other pairs in, and he had just us race Volp and do you remember this, Dan? And, I mean, we had beaten him by, like, maybe 5 seconds on the 1500. And this is classic Volp and JR, like...
You're missing the NSR at this practice, but I will correct you when you're done.
Well, I don't know what you count me on, but whatever. We line up 2 boats side by side, and they jump out on us, and then Volp shifts over and puddles us for about 1,250 meters while we're just unraveling and yelling at each other. We went from being, like, as high could be, like, holy smokes, you this, to just...
Yeah.
And
Okay.
JR assuming their rightful place on the top of the heap and showing us.
So yes, you're combining 3 stories. The
Which
practice,
I believe would be the case.
the practice was actually us doing 3-mile pieces, and we couldn't get... You and I could only row well full speed.
Yeah,
Like that.
Yeah.
So that the first we were doing these pieces where we were doing 3-milers, and we were just getting wrecked by everybody by like 30 seconds, yelling at us the entire time. And Mike took us to the, like, after, he's like, dude, I need you guys to, like, be in the top 6, and, like, you're the bottom, like, you're 20th. Like, what the hell? Like, do I have to separate you two? And we're like, no. So then we did these 1500s at full rate, and we actually won that practice. We beat JR and Volp in that practice. And Mike was, like, shouting at us with the last 500, being like, keep going. Cause we were at that moment, we were actually at world record pace in the pair. And cause I remember, cause this is when I knew that I made the 8, right? So for me, it's really important. Cause I was like, nobody's beating me on port side. So then the NSR came, and typical me and you, Mike's like, you can't win by enough. So we win the time trial by a mile. We win our heat by a mile. We win a semi by a mile, and we're exhausted. You know, we're tired. And JR and Volp came in last in the time trial and just made it through. Like, they're just not trying through the whole thing. And then the final of the NSR is exactly what happened, is they jumped us, puddled us, and we're just like, like, so tired because we're not rowing well. And then I heard the beep, and I thought it was us, and took a stroke off before the line, and that's when Beery and Mike had nipped us, and I'm like, oh God, and we got online, and Mike's like, I was like, here it comes. So yes, it's 3 stories, which I think leads us into a really fun question, because Volp, you know, is such a central figure to so much speed, but in rowing, it is competition. And one of the things that we're really trying to lean into is, like, competition is part of the beauty of this. And for every hero's journey, you're somebody else's villain. So who do you think you were the biggest villain to in your rowing? Best answer yet. That's the best answer yet. Whose day do you think you ruined the most?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't have to answer.
Starboard.
Look how uncomfortable. Look at how you are.
Yeah, I don't want to answer this.
Okay, tell.
No, I'm
All right,
abstaining.
next question. Next question. All right, after torturing you with that, let me compose myself. This is the final question for me.
Wait, have you ever gotten an answer to that question?
Yeah.
Great answers. That
People
was
will be
pretty
like,
good, though.
this person
Wait, did
in
Volp
high
say me?
school.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Who did Volp say?
Huh? We didn't have the question yet for him.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he probably would say everybody. Luke, we got Luke real good with that question, because somebody was saying something about college and about, like, well, and Luke, you know, and, like, Luke was everybody's villain in college. Everybody hated him.
Yeah. Yeah, I peaked
right.
early.
That we might have to come back to that in episode, you know, in when you come back on again. So, all right. Last question. And this one is our favorite, because I think it really helps people know what to do if they want to be excellent. If you could go back in time or forward in time and coach yourself, when would it be, and what would you say?
It would be in 05 in the single. To my earlier point, I would have taken that fall off from competing. I would have taken more time off. I would have eased back into training a little bit more. And one of the biggest compliments, one of maybe 3 compliments that Chris has given me outright was, a couple of years ago, he was like, yeah, I wish he said that to me. I wish we'd given you more time to just give the single a go. And that coming from Chris meant a lot to me.
Yeah. The power of the coach to compliment an athlete goes way further than we remember. Wyatt Allen, you are one of the most cherished gods in my pantheon, and I really appreciate you doing this show. You knew it was destined. You knew I wasn't going to let you get away with it, and I'm really glad that we got to celebrate the successes that you've had as an athlete and as a coach. And I just hope that Dartmouth really recognizes what an amazing coach they have. And I know your athletes see it. And you're just such a great human being, and you're such a great manifestation of the human spirit. And I'm just so lucky to have you as a friend. I think anyone who rows with you is lucky to have you as a teammate. And if you ever want to come back to the Mettle Factory and hang out, you're always welcome. And I really appreciate you being here, man. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me. And I'm not really a podcast guy, but this has been a lot more fun than I anticipated. And a lot of it is just like the stories that came pouring out, and the shared experiences, and the roles that you guys played in my life and my experience on the national team. So I'm super appreciative of this experience. And yeah, just
All right, man.
We appreciate you coming on and sharing stories. Super
Always
cool.
welcome. Mettle Factory fans, that is Wyatt Allen, and we'll see you next time. Cut.
That's all for today's show. Fast Friends is a Mettle Factory production. All opinions expressed are our own and those of our guests. If you like our show, follow along or subscribe with us wherever you get your content and podcasts. Thanks for listening.